Well, thank you everyone for joining my session today, and thank you to the Valo team for putting on another spectacular virtual event. You guys are just do awesome work, and I'm really feel privileged to be part of it. So today we're going to be talking about modernizing your digital workplace, specifically about the journey from classic to modern Valo Intranet. So it is going to be specifically about Valo, but some of this process can be for non-Valo engagements or non-Valo projects. But the focus will be Valo. What I want to do first is just to get a gauge on who's in this session so I can tailor it appropriately. If you guys can just really quickly just scan that QR code. It's one question. I just want to know who we have on the meeting, and I'll give like literally 1 minute to get responses. You could also hit that short URL there if that works better for you guys. And let's just give that a minute. Got my first one, 2. Okay. Great. We'll let that come in, and I'm going to move on to introduce myself. So my name is Matt Fishman. I'm co-founder and director of solution delivery for Klarinet Solutions. Klarinet has been working with Valo since 2016, and we've been a premium partner with Valo since the beginning. We were the first Valo Partner of the Year in 2017, and I was the Valo Contributor of the Year in 2017 as well. I think we were one of the first 3 or so Valo partners in North America. We also won a Customer Success Story in 2018, Partner of the Year finalist 2019, 2020, and this last year we won Marketing Master Award from Valo. So we have a really close relationship with the team there. We really value Valo as a partner. So that should give you kind of an idea. So it looks like on the results we have the majority of the folks are SharePoint, Microsoft 365 administrators. I have 4 others, which is a little tough. 1 Valo partner, and yeah, so and a few other scattered around there. So that's great. So with that said, this session is going to be focused on the journey, 2 case studies basically, or 2 client real world projects from 2 of our clients moving from Valo Classic to Valo Modern. 2 very different approaches though. So the first one is going to be with an organization called JAMS, and basically that was a full top to bottom taking a Valo Classic intranet and rebuilding it in Valo Modern. So typically that engagement for us would be about a month, but with the COVID situation, we had some delays there. So it was about a 2-month engagement. Essentially, it's a deployment of Valo, restructuring of content, and migration of that content into that new structure. The second case study that we're going to look at today is for a customer called Dexcom. They're a medical device manufacturer based here in San Diego. And we call that engagement Modernize Lightspeed. So this is a 1-week engagement, and I know we have a couple partners, Valo partners on in this session. This is an engagement that we are using to allow I think we have about 20 clients that are still on Valo Classic. Some of those are on-prem, but about 20 clients that are still on Valo Classic. It's a way to get them to move. It's a migration path or an upgrade path to get them to modern, be able to take advantage of the features. So essentially, we're calling that a modern classic hybrid approach. So those are the 2 cases that we're going to look at today, and I'm just going to take you through what each of those different engagements looks like. So we'll start with JAMS. This is a full modernize project. So what JAMS is an organization, they're in the legal industry, and they do dispute resolution, legal disputes, and they have moderators and judges, retired judges that can basically moderate disputes, legal disputes. About 500 users for the organization. JAMS was actually our second Valo Classic deployment that we did in late 2016. It's a really interesting case actually because, and I tell the story a lot when I'm talking to folks. They were an existing client. We had built a ground up custom intranet responsive on SharePoint 2013. Their CTO came to us on, well, I think it was like December 23rd and told us we need to be in Office 365 by January 1st. So we literally they were live in 8 days with migration from SharePoint 2013 to Office 365. They just said move the content. So there's really not a lot of thought put into the design of the homepage, as you can see, and it hasn't changed in 4 years. So that should give you an idea on what this was. This was what their classic site looked like up until last month. All right. So what brought them back to us? I mean, we had an ongoing relationship with them, but there was a big drive from upper management to have more engaging news, including video. And like I said, they really never took advantage of some of the features in classic Valo, but they were aware of some of the features and the content creation tools that are built into Valo. So they wanted to take advantage of that. As I mentioned earlier, is somewhat stagnant content, no engagement from their users, essentially a couple department homepages and some documents, but pretty basic stuff. Mid-project, COVID became a huge COVID and remote workforce became a huge driver for this project. So that just kind of happened because of what's going on in the world. So what our solution was is full deployment of Valo Modern, develop a new information architecture following best practices, which is a flat architecture. I still refer to Joanne Klein's ebook about the modern architecture for modern sites. I refer to it all the time. I ask my clients to read it. And I'll talk about kind of the training that we build into our engagements in a little bit, because for organizations that are not used to modern, or they're living either on-prem SharePoint server or still have classic intranets, a lot of the process it needs to have training built in for them to make informed decisions. So moving on, we restructured their content from subsites to separate site collections, streamlining of permissions. As you know, after 4 years, you probably know permissions get a little messy with unique permissions. So we take the opportunity to normalize that with the migration. So we build the new information architecture, we migrate our content in, and then we modernize their pages using SharePoint PNP transformation engine. I'll talk about that in a little bit later. And also the client also added the people add-on in the engagement. So what does that implementation look like? Well, since they are local to us, well, they're about an hour north of us. We had planned. Oh no, we actually did. We did an on-site 1-day discovery workshop. So for the partners that are in the session, we use the Valo Modern Information Architecture Workbook that Valo provides to partners, and we use that as our requirements document. So in those discovery workshops, we basically gather all the requirements for, it would be the same thing as a brand new implementation. There's a little bit more to it because we have to do some remapping requirements as part of the migration work. We deploy, go ahead, question? Yeah.
Yeah, there's a question about what is Valo Modern as opposed to. So can you elaborate what Valo Modern overall is?
Yeah, that's a big question. So Well, let's start with Valo Classic. Valo Classic is built on classic SharePoint and leverages SharePoint publishing. So all of your pages use page layouts, and really that hasn't changed. That hadn't changed much since SharePoint 2013, really. So and along with that, news was managed through blogs. So if you wanted to create a new news article in Valo Classic, you would do so by creating a blog. Microsoft has since then deprecated blogs. Not that those sites don't work anymore, but they've taken the ability to create new blogs out of the user interface. And you can see a trend. SharePoint, Microsoft and Valo are not putting much of effort into any enhancements in the classic infrastructure, classic SharePoint. The 100% of the focus, aside from like security and that kind of thing, is on Modern. So Modern is brand new. Well, not brand new anymore, but it has a modern user interface. The Valo Modern in particular, so that lives or works on top of SharePoint Modern, and it has some really engaging, easy to use content creation wizards. So it's kind of like providing a guided experience to your content authors to create anything that they need to create on the intranet. So if they want to create a news article or a page or a poll or adding a brand new site to their intranet, you can actually do that all through kind of content creation wizards. That's my short answer to that. We can definitely circle back on it. Did that help? I hope that helped. Okay, and I'll show you some examples of a couple slides ago. That was Valo Classic, and at the end, I'll show you what the modern site looks like. So, so we have the full modern deployment. We migrate the content using ShareGate. That's just our preference. My preference is to use the ShareGate migration product. There are other products out there. It's ShareGate's what I use. Page migration, which we'll talk about a little bit. Page migration is really interesting because there's no direct perfect path from going to from a classic SharePoint page to a modern page. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then I mentioned before classic news. So Valo uses blogs for the news. We need to get those into modern news. So there's a little bit of, well, there's different strategies for getting there. And then we have the go live. Okay, so that's kind of what the implementation, the project as a whole looks like. So what's involved here is we do a one-day on-site requirements gathering workshop. Again, we've leveraged Valo Modern's information architecture workbook that has all of the requirements, everything that we need to gather in order to do the deployment of Valo. And we build in training into the requirements gathering. Again, some organizations that have not had the exposure to Modern don't know what a hub site is or a communication site or how you manage permissions and how it's different and can I create subsites and all of those questions that go along with it. So we kind of build in the knowledge transfer of the differences between classic and modern into that requirements gathering process. At the same time, we also describe and document what the various features are, feature sets are in Valo, so that the client can make informed decisions as to how they want to use the tools, both from the SharePoint side and the Valo side. In all of our projects, we also do weekly status meetings where we can track progress on tasks and all that stuff. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about migration. So we deploy Valo, and now we have this shell of an intranet that has no content in it. Now we got to get content in there. I have a classic site that has document libraries, lists, workflows, pages, as I talked about earlier. We need to get that content into the modern infrastructure. Again, we use ShareGate for that. I rely heavily on the ShareGate reporting features to generate input files for my migration script. So I recommend only using PowerShell for migration for a couple of reasons I'll talk about in a second. One of my recommendations for doing this type of classic to modern migration is to not migrate sites. Don't migrate your subsites. migrate my lists and libraries into the new infrastructure. Many reasons for that. Primarily, it's to normalize permissions. So over time, as I mentioned, 4 years go by, you have unique permissions on for no real reason, just because somebody decided to share a particular document, breaks permissions, and then you have a permissions mess when somebody else comes into the organization and doesn't have access to a particular file, folder, or whatever it is. So we take the opportunity to not migrate the permissions along with that SharePoint content unless absolutely necessary. So if there's a compelling business reason for security or compliance or whatever it is, then and only then do we actually migrate that content with permissions. So that's kind of a part of what the work that we have to do in doing that content mapping. But essentially, we use the ShareGate reporting scripts to generate the input files. Input files, by that I mean like a CSV file, that we could then loop through that content that might have like a source list and a destination site where we want to the from, the source, and the destination. And then based on what it is, we can configure, write our migration scripts to handle different cases. So for instance, if it was something that we needed to, we can flag a particular list or library to copy permissions, then we can use different options in our migration scripts. So the other big reason for, or my preference, is to not use the user interface for migration activities, is because that's kind of a manual process where you have to go into the user interface, run your migration. So what happens when you need to do your final, essentially when you do a migration, do an initial migration, and then you do an incremental, maybe once, maybe twice, maybe 3 times before you actually do a hard cutover. Using PowerShell for all the migration activities, you're basically just running the same PowerShell script with maybe a switch. So you can just say that, oh no, this is an incremental migration, and it will do the same migration every time. So it's a way to kind of automate the entire process. We do it one time in writing our input or writing our script and generating the input files from ShareGate, and then after that, it's just fire it off. Okay. All right. Web part pages, publishing pages, and blogs. Oh my, I don't know. I just went with that. This particular client had about 50 pages, which isn't that much. It's not too bad. Our original plan for this was to go on site to their office in Irvine and work with 1 or 2 of their folks and just rebuild all their pages. Because of COVID, we were not able to do that, so we had to go with a different approach. We could have still done it, but we were actually trying to leverage their help in building those pages. And at the same time, in doing that, they're gaining knowledge on how to work with Modern, how to work with the Valo tools specifically. So what we did is we looked at the SharePoint PNP page transformation engine. I have some links down here at the bottom of the slide deck, but essentially what it does is it converts a classic page, and I'll talk about the different types of pages that it can convert, into a modern page. And you can use this from Office 365 classic site collection to Office 365 modern site collection. You can also use it from an on-prem site to an online site. So you can use this to actually migrate your pages from on-prem to online. Now, there's some caveats here. So what does it work with? It works with web part pages, and it works with publishing pages, blogs, and wikis. So all of those pages can work. There are scripts on the previous, there was a link at the bottom of the previous slide that links to the project, to the PNP project for transformation. And there's actually scripts there that you could just fire off that will take all of the pages that live in a particular site collection and move them to a modern site collection. So caveats here. only certain web parts are supported. Most of the common ones, list views, content editors, image web parts are supported. There's even some caveats to that. So if you have a content editor that might have an image in it or a video, those will get stripped out because SharePoint Modern does not support images embedded into text web parts. Now you do have a capability to map web parts, so you can have a custom mapping. So if you wanted to move, say, a script editor web part to, say, an open source version of a modern script editor, you can do that with a custom mapping file. So basically what we have here is a starting point. We can use these tools to move the pages, and we have something to work with. Most of the time, we have to go back into those pages and update them to use some of the modern tools. In Classic, you might have had somebody embedding images of department contacts with their phone number and that kind of thing. With Modern SharePoint, we can use a modern people web part or something like that. So we'll leave it there. If you have SPFX web parts that are being used in a Classic site, they will come over as is, and they should work just the same. Have a link here to the full list of the web part mappings. So basically, we'll show you if you have a list view web part, what it will convert to on the modern page, and if there's any exceptions or special cases with any of those. Okay. So what about the classic news blogs? We talked about this before. This particular client, they did not actually publish news for years until COVID-19. And when COVID-19 started, remote workforce, they were publishing news every single day. Note from the CEO, whatever it is, updates from local government, that kind of thing. So this became kind of more of a requirement in the middle of the project, where they said, no, we want to have all of the classic news from March 15th in the new site. So we can do this with PnP page transformation, but there's some limitations. So if it was a non-Valo site and you were using classic blogs for news on your classic site, you can actually move those pages with page transformation. But because Valo has really specific metadata for publish date and maybe some tagging and that kind of thing, that didn't quite work for us. So we actually developed, we use Power Automate, and I can show you it's a little bit complex, but and essentially we're using REST API to get the page on the source site, get the content that lives in the body of that page, create a new page, a new modern page, and then update it with the content within that page. So we used it to automate that process. Okay. So what's the go live scenario? So now we have all of our content is migrated. We have all of our news blogs are now modern news pages. Our site is fully configured. They want to go live. So we do our incremental migration. Everything's updated. Now the classic site, the old intranet, lives in the tenant root. So it lives at tenantname.sharepoint.com. And obviously the client wants the new site to be in the same location. So where we deployed the modern site, the Valo Modern Hub site is /site/new intranet. So what we do, Microsoft has a PowerShell commandlet called Invoke SPO site swap. And what this does is it takes a source site collection and it changes the URL essentially. So it changes the pointer URL for that site. So if you look here, you have one parameter here called source URL. This is the source site. This is a hub site, a Valo hub site, and we're moving it to this URL, which is the target URL. Now, what about the site that's living in the target URL, the classic site? Well, there's another parameter that says archive URL. This is where we're going to move the classic site to in case we need to refer to it or something like that. Couple of things to mention here. So Invoke SPO site swap does not work for hub sites. So we have to do a couple things. We have to demote the Valo hub, or if it's not Valo, we have to demote the hub site to a regular communication site. After you run this command, you can then promote it to a hub, and it should not lose any of the connections to the sites connected to that hub. So that works pretty well. So that's pretty much it. So results. So this is what their modern Valo site looks like. As you can see, they're using the Candela theme. They're using a vertical web part zone. They implemented the people finder in the upper right-hand corner there. They're using some social web parts. So see, it's a much more engaging interface. And that was our result. Client was really happy. They actually went live beginning of this month. Yeah, around there. So that's case one. Case two. I could stop right here if there's any questions on any of that. I know it was a lot. Ilya, just let me know. I can't see the chat, so great.
There's none at the moment.
Awesome.
One which I responded for you.
Awesome. Okay, so case number two. Dexcom. So Dexcom is a medical device manufacturer that develops a continuous glucose monitoring company. They're based here in San Diego. They have about 2,500 users. They're based, like I said, in San Diego, but they have offices in Europe and APAC. What you're seeing here on the right-hand side is their classic SharePoint, classic Valo Intranet. We deployed this in, I believe, early 2018. Okay. And this was a customer success story win for Dexcom and Klarinet. So this was their initial implementation, and it was really, there's awesome case studies out there. If you just type in Dexcom Valo case study, you should see some links to it. They had done a lot of metrics and analysis on common tasks on the old intranet. They did the same analysis after the new intranet was deployed. So they had some really scientific data behind how long it took a user to complete a common task, overall satisfaction, and the numbers were really compelling, like 300% improvement in customer in user satisfaction on the Valo deployment. So they came to us, and internal communications ultimately wanted to restructure the site, but they did not want to impact any of their employees during the COVID crisis. Okay. They wanted to take advantage of the amazing content creation capabilities built into Valo Modern. And they also had several business units that were building modern communication sites, but there is no integration with anything else because they're just completely siloed sites that had no links back to an intranet. So they're basically just linking between sites. So that was kind of our scenario that we had there. So what we did is Valo Modern actually supports, and Valo Classic essentially, I think after version 1.19 or 1.18 supports a Valo Modern Classic hybrid. And essentially what this does is it allows classic Valo sites to use the same navigation and footer as the modern site. So you can actually move from a modern site or navigate from a modern site to a classic site with very little visual impact to the end user. So in most cases, the end user wouldn't even know that you're moving between classic and modern. So in this case, they wanted to not impact any users. No client, no employee communication around this change. They just wanted to be able to take advantage of the new features. So we replicated as close as possible the branding and the homepage design, so not to impact the users. So that's essentially what we did there. So we basically, it was an existing relationship with a client. We did a kickoff meeting just to validate those requirements. Valo minimal configuration. What this means is we're deploying essentially just the Valo hub, the top level site, and we're replicating the classic navigation in the modern hub. So essentially you have the same navigation that they had in their classic Valo site, but it's displayed in the modern hub. Okay. And then we had some CSS and design work that we had to do in order to make the hybrid navigation and footer look like the modern one. So there's some manual work there. Go live scenario in this case. So they wanted their Valo Modern site to be in the tenant root. The current classic site was in /site/intranet. So we did the same thing, invoke SPO site swap. So we're moving the intranet new into the root, and we're moving the root site to root archive. Then we have to enable Modern Connect on Valo Classic and include some custom CSS. And this is documented for the Valo partners that are in the session. Uh, uh, we have Valo has documented this process. Essentially, you're running a Valo deployment script that enables that modern connector. Once you do that, you actually see on your classic site collection, you see the same navigation that you have in your modern site. And then the last step in this process is we associate all of those existing communication sites with the Valo Hub and ensure that they're in the navigation. So what that does is they have, say, I think 6 or 7 modern communication sites. We add those or associate those with the hub, and then they inherit the same navigation you have on the modern sites. And now they have an integrated experience for their intranet across their brand new hub, the Valo Modern Hub, across their classic sites and across their new communication sites that were already existing. Okay. So this is what their end product looked like, their Dexcom modern homepage, and it does not look so different than their classic one. I can show you, go back and forth and show you the difference there. But that's kind of what that looks like. And this is what their classic, this is an example of a classic page. You notice end user going between these, there's some minor difference, but an end user would not really pick up that you're going between classic and modern SharePoint. So yeah. So outcomes, Dexcom can now take advantage of the rich content authoring as well as the Valo for Teams and mobile capabilities that are built into Valo Modern. They weren't able to do that before, but they can now. Again, it provides a consistent look and feel, not only for the classic Valo Intranet, but also existing communication sites. Most importantly, this was a 1-week engagement. It now allows them, they're better positioned to do a phased ramp up, a phased migration or upgrade of their classic sites to modern. They don't have to do it all at once. Or they can decide in the future, I want a brand new information architecture, and they can go down that path as well. It required no employee communication to go live. We did it on a weeknight, and we did the swap, and there were no issues. It was the only people that were really happy were the internal communications folks, because they were able to have more capabilities in terms of creating news content. That's it. I know I finished. I went pretty fast. So this is my contact information. You can add me on Twitter. My email address and company is Klarinet Solutions. So I'm open for any questions. I can take a deeper look at any of the things that I mentioned or links. Happy to take anything you have.
While waiting for people to ask, I have one. What has been customer feedback from when after they've been introduced the modern look and feel, so that how have they taken that? What has been kind of the impressions, and has that then brought you new opportunities to actually start working more with these existing customers?
Yeah, so definitely. So all of the feedback that we've received, and granted, clients are always funny about feedback. You have to ask for the positive feedback usually, but you hear when it's negative. In this case, we actually got really positive feedback from both of these client cases, and that's when we work primarily with internal communications or IT folks. When they get praise or they get positive comments from their coworkers, that usually comes back to us. And this happened with Angela. She got a lot of kudos within the organization, and I just took this from an email that she sent me. This SharePoint upgrade had significant and positive impact throughout the company. Received so much from associates indicating that it was modern, clean, and easy to use. And to answer your question more, as part of this engagement, incidentally, they had a lot of SharePoint designer workflows that we had built for them years ago, and we did take an opportunity to update most of those. They did migrate, but we updated most of those to Power Automate and a couple Power Apps to go along with those. So there is additional opportunity to take advantage of those features. Not that you can't use flows or Power Automate with Classic. It's just it maybe pushes things along a little bit more to when you've kind of built this brand new portal to be able to take advantage of those new features. And in some cases, the migration of those workflows wasn't going to work too well. So it was a good opportunity to modernize some of those things. But in general, yes, I'd say that having a modern intranet does allow you, it gives you more flexibility to take advantage of some of the other components that are built into Microsoft 365. It's an opportunity.
Yeah. And then a related question also for the participants, because there are so many of you, are you all in the classic thinking about modern migration and just a classic SharePoint looking for opportunity to go modern, or just let us know why are you participating in this, and what is your gain and motivation actually to drive towards modern SharePoint? So feel free to open your mic and just let us know what you think.
Well, I'll just say while we're waiting for comments that it's very, for a lot of our clients that are still on Classic, whether they're Valo customers or not, it's very overwhelming, especially when they've been living in that world for such a long period of time and not knowing what that path looks like because there's so many pieces to it. I think a lot of the market that are still, or a lot of the organizations that are still on classic intranets or using classic workspaces are quite overwhelmed with what that process looks like. So it kind of takes a little bit of work, and like I said, the training piece of it is so important because it really empowers organizations to feel more comfortable with that process, because it really does not have to be complex, and it's a great opportunity to bring things in line with Microsoft's best practices for kind of a flat architecture and that kind of thing. It was kind of the same thing that we kind of dealt with years ago when we had the majority of our clients on-prem and wanting to move to Office 365 SharePoint Online, where a good majority of our clients had their collaboration content and their intranet content all in one site collection. And there was a lot of work there in decoupling that content and making sure that we were following the best practices there. So, and that was really overwhelming for, a lot of organizations. So, and I still see it. We still see a lot of clients that have this collaboration content mixed in classic site collections.
Good. Thank you, Matt.
Yep.
I was just thinking about the same thing when you were talking. Now the approach was from Valo Modern to from Valo Classic to Valo Modern, but I think what you're telling us is that the same model applies to any Classic
Yep.
to Valo Modern, or any Classic to Modern overall.
Exactly. We did talk specifically about some of the Valo functionality, but there are open source SPFX extensions that allow you to do an integrated navigation between classic and modern. So there are ways to accomplish the same thing without Valo. But the approach is the same for going from classic to modern. It's building the new information architecture, taking the opportunity to normalize your permissions and scripting that migration. So it will apply either way. And the same, of course, moving pages. ShareGate does an amazing job in moving content, but pages, we have some clients that have over 300 subsites within their intranet site collection that's still on Classic. So you can imagine if you have 300 subsites, you have a minimum of 300 publishing pages typically, and it's probably more like 500 to 700 pages because every site has more than one page. So that can be a really huge undertaking, having to rebuild 700 pages. But there are tools out there that let you automate it. So that's really the point. It just seems like, so with the approach, with an approach like that, in fact, the client that I was just thinking about, they're going with that same model of doing this kind of modernize Lightspeed, where we're just replacing the homepage essentially with a Valo hub or a modern hub, and then using that integrated navigations to get them there. It's kind of a step into the future, I guess you can say.
Exactly. Then what happens when you are in the modern? So that when you have taken the customer into modern and they are starting to use, what would be the kind of relevant next steps using the modern? How would you introduce the next steps for the customer and then guide them to actually leveraging more of the Microsoft 365 capabilities?
Well, what we do, and I'm just talking about Klarinet, is we actually, for all of our clients, we do monthly tech talks, so all of our managed clients get invited to a monthly tech talk. In those sessions, we talk about what's new in Microsoft 365 platform, what's gone general availability in the past month, and we take one topic every month and kind of dissect it. We actually did one yesterday, and it was on the new Microsoft 365 security and compliance centers. So in doing that, we provide the client with the tools that they need, and they can learn what's possible in terms of retention labels and sensitivity labels and that kind of thing. And because most of our clients don't know about it, there's no way that folks that are not living in this world all the time can stay on top of everything, that's all the changes that are happening. So that's what we typically do, and we have those touch points with our clients on a regular basis. And there's more opportunities to basically take advantage of the tools that are in the platform when the client knows what's possible.
Yeah, there's a discussion on a Teams meetings in the chat at the same time.
Oh. Clients can join.
So any questions for Matt regarding migration, SharePoint? I would say that you can ask Matt anything you might.
You can add AMA.
There isn't a thing what Matt can't answer.
Well, I don't know. I don't know about that. I think between you and I, we can answer anything. How about that? Yeah. So I must have talked fast because when I went through it the first time, it took me much longer. So, well, I will take this opportunity to again thank the amazing Valo team for putting on this event, and to all of the other presenters. You guys are all an inspiration to me, and I'm just happy to be part of this community, and if there's anything that I can answer or help out with to any of the participants in this call, just feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you so much for your time. So And it's actually good. Now we have 15-minute break before the next session, so use that the way you feel. Many of you have been already part of the early morning, so feel free to have a cup of coffee, and then we'll continue in 15 minutes.